Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be looking at a few ways that the college application process either will be or might be a bit different this fall. So just as a quick disclaimer, it's important to recognize that colleges are adapting to COVID-19, and it's going to be important that you as a rising senior are very informed about the colleges that you intend to apply to. So you want to make sure that you understand their current admissions criteria. I would also recommend speaking to your guidance counselor to make sure that they are aware of the colleges you intend to apply to. That way they can help you out as much as possible. So make sure that you're staying informed with up-to-date information because this is going to change throughout the summer and the fall. So the first change is one that many of you have probably already heard of, and that is that there is a growing list of schools that are becoming test optional, which basically means that you do not have to submit SAT or ACT scores with your application. I imagine that some of you, as you are putting together your college list, are going to find that there are some colleges on your list that are test optional now, whereas others aren't, or at least they aren't yet. So how do you actually navigate this as a student? It's important to remember that you want to consider each school individually and you want to tailor your application to that school specifically. So if you've already taken the SAT or the ACT and you scored well, then it would be fine to submit those scores, whether they're required or test optional. So how do you determine if you scored well? Look at what the criteria was for SAT and ACT scores in previous years. You can find the average ranges for previous years, and that would tell you where you stand. And that would help you decide if it's worth it, if it is optional. Now, if you look at your scores and they're beneath that average, then it's possible that it would adversely impact you if you did submit those scores. So if it's test optional, you might choose not to do so. So let's say that you're applying to a college or colleges that do require test scores, or you need a test score to get into, say, a concurrent credit class at your high school, and you either haven't taken the ACT or SAT yet to make a qualifying score, or you did take it, but your score was not as good as you might have wanted it to be. One thing you need to do in these instances is to make sure that you are informed of upcoming testing dates. I know a lot of students were registered for different dates in the spring and summer, and those dates have either been postponed or canceled, and new dates have been added. So you want to make sure that you are knowledgeable about the test that you've signed up for or that you need to take and how it's going to be administered in your area and when. So double check on that information. If you're not sure, please contact your guidance counselors. Now, there might be a couple other situations that apply to some of you that you might also want to be aware of. So for instance, I know that in the state that I live in and teach in, there are opportunities for lower income students to get a test fee waiver for the ACT. And so if you think you might qualify for that, or if you're not sure if your state does that, talk to your guidance counselor, because if money is really tight right now, that might be an option. Another thing is that if you're worried about your concurrent credit classes, ask if your school accepts the AccuPlacer, because if you can't take the ACT right now, the AccuPlacer might be an alternative option as well. So talk to your guidance counselors, especially if you're concerned about getting certain scores that you need, either for concurrent credit or the colleges that you're applying to, because they might have options that you're not currently aware of. Due to the number of people who have been adversely impacted financially by COVID-19, it's entirely possible that we are going to see some unique trends in terms of where students are applying if they want to try to be more financially responsible. So generally speaking, it's important to know that community colleges tend to be the most affordable option. And then after you've gone there for a semester or a year or 2 years, you can then transfer to a 4-year institution. There's also public institutions and private institutions. So private colleges tend to be the most expensive. It's also important to know that in-state tuition is usually a lot less expensive than out-of-state tuition. So with the number of students who might be applying to community colleges or public universities, it's possible that private institutions are going to compensate by admitting more students in order to keep their enrollment up. So these are things that you might want to be aware of as you are making your college list. So how does this affect you as a student, especially if you're concerned with your finances? Well, the answer is going to vary depending on your situation, but one thing to do if you have multiple schools on your list might be to scale back a little bit and and narrow your list down to like 3 to 5 schools, especially if those 3 to 5 schools all have separate application fees. That way you're not paying for a bunch of application fees and you're really narrowing it down to a list of a few schools that you like. I would still apply to more than one institution though. Now, let's say that some of the schools on your list are Common App schools or Coalition App schools. That could be helpful because if you can pay for one application fee and apply to multiple schools, then you could be saving yourself at least the application fee, even if some of those schools might tend to have a higher tuition. Because remember, you can get scholarships and financial aid. So that is something to think about as well. Another way to save some money might be to take an AP class and an AP test or a concurrent credit class. So what you need to do is actually go to each college's website and you're going to find basically a list of the different AP tests that they will accept and what they will count it for. So you need to know which score you need to earn in order to receive college credit from that institution. You also want to double check that they will accept your concurrent credit. A lot of times concurrent credit does not transfer out of state, so you want to double check this because it would be really annoying to take a concurrent credit class and then find out that it doesn't actually count at the institution that you're going to. So double check these options before your senior year. That way you're informed and you can make the best decision possible for you. Another thing that you might want to ask as far as a concurrent credit class is if you take the concurrent credit class, do you still need to apply to that institution or are you sort of grandfathered in because you're already enrolled due to the concurrent credit class? So some colleges are going to say, yes, you still need to apply. Other colleges are going to say, no, you're already enrolled, so you don't need to apply. And that would at least save you an application fee. So if you have concurrent credit classes at your high school, just double check to see what the exact policy is, because that could potentially inform your decision as well. The last thing to consider in terms of finances for college application fees is that you might want to consider more safety or target schools, because if money's kind of tight, you might feel like you're throwing your money away on a reach school if you don't get in. I'm not saying that you either can't or shouldn't apply to a couple of reach schools, but if money's kind of tight right now and you're trying to be frugal, that would be something to consider. So what about scholarships? Will those be affected in 2020? And if so, how? Well, a lot of this remains to be seen, so keep that in mind. It's also important to recognize that it's going to differ depending on the college and the scholarship that we're talking about. That being said, it's possible that some colleges might actually offer more scholarships or more money in scholarships because they're trying to entice students to go there. They're trying to keep their enrollment up. However, that being said, it's possible that some colleges have been hit really hard financially because of COVID-19, and they might not have as much to offer as in the past. So what does this mean for you as a student? Well, unless you have this dream school where you're like, I'm going there no matter what, as long as I get in, then chances are you might want to wait and see all of your acceptances and look at all of your offers. That way you can compare and make an informed decision based on your financial situation and based on what is best for you at the time, because there are other factors other than just finances. That being said, you also might want to look at maybe early action as opposed to early decision, because early action is not binding, early decision is. Not all schools do early action or early decision, but if that is something you're thinking of because you're like, I want to know sooner, I totally understand that, by the way, then you might want to consider early action and not early decision. Also, while it is wonderful to get a scholarship from your institution, don't forget about local scholarships as well. Typically, you start to apply for these in the spring. So if you don't get a full ride somewhere, or if you do, but you still need help with like books and other things like that, don't forget that you can still apply for local scholarships. It's also possible that there might be more need-based financial aid options available, especially because of COVID-19. It is possible that some applications are going to have COVID-19 based questions. So that would be one opportunity to basically explain how your family has been adversely impacted, if that's the case. Another option that has been there in the past that you could use to your advantage would be to answer one of the sort of open-ended questions. Usually they're at the end of an application, and I've seen these on college applications and also scholarship applications. Basically, they ask you, is there anything else we need to know when considering your application? And so students can answer this question in a variety of ways. And so if there is no other place for you to actually explain your situation because of COVID-19, and you think that is something that should be considered, that is one way that you can include it on your application. This next change is one that I think is going to start with you guys who are rising seniors and is going to continue for the next few years. And that is that grades are going to be viewed slightly differently. And that is because during COVID-19, when schools went to virtual learning, a lot of them did not have a system in place to give out grades the same way. They simply couldn't. And so many districts actually went to a pass-fail system, or they did something kind of similar. And so your spring grades for your junior semester are not exactly the same as your other grades. College admissions officers are going to know this, but what does this mean for you guys who are rising seniors? It's important to remember that college admissions officers are going to be looking at the big picture. They're going to be looking at your performance over the course of 3 years. And so even if you went to a pass-fail system this last semester, that is not necessarily going to be something that would hurt you. That being said, I don't want you guys to slack off during your senior year. I don't want you to think that those grades don't matter. Even once you've gotten your acceptances, that does not mean that you should slack off, because number one, they still look at your grades, and number two, you want to keep learning. That way you are actually prepared for college. Also, I think this is going to place more importance on recommendation letters, and so I would encourage you to start thinking about which teachers you could ask for a strong recommendation letter. So this does not need to be the most popular teacher. It doesn't need to be the teacher that you have had in class the most. It needs to be the teacher that knows you the best, someone who can speak to your academic curiosity and your work ethic. And if you happen to have had some difficulties, maybe your grades haven't always been consistent, but you're trying, hopefully that person can emphasize that. You want it to be someone who is going to personalize this letter and not give you some generic response that they give to every student. You want it to be somebody who is going to customize it to you and your needs and your situation, and is going to highlight your strengths. And so recommendation letters, I think, are going to be even more crucial because students are going to have a semester where their grades weren't exactly what they normally would have been. Another major change is that there are likely going to be some gaps in your activities. And this is completely understandable because schools did close. So you really couldn't participate in the competitions that you normally would have. You couldn't have won some of the awards that you might have won simply because they weren't an option anymore. And so colleges know this. That being said, this is a good time to reflect on what you can do. So what can you do this summer to help set you apart? And what can you do that is actually fun and meaningful to you? So in thinking about filling in the gaps on your resume, it's not necessarily about taking on more responsibilities or more activities, but rather you want to think of things that are meaningful. So what are your talents and your passions, and how can you pursue those even if the circumstances are a bit different? So let's say, for instance, that you were named the captain of a sports team and you had planned on having practices over the summer to demonstrate your leadership. Well, maybe now you need to do that remotely. Maybe you could host a virtual workout every week for your teammates. That's still leadership. So think about what you intended to do your senior year and think about how you might be able to adapt that to the current situation. Another change is that because students aren't going to be able to tour college campuses this summer and possibly even this fall because of different circumstances, there are now going to be more virtual tours and more online Q&A sessions. This is going to be helpful because in some sense it makes the experience a bit more accessible to students who cannot travel. For those of you who might be prospective collegiate athletes, chances are the recruiting process is going to look and feel a little bit different compared to years past. And that's because it really depends on the sport and the season, but a lot of you who are spring sports athletes might not have gotten the times, the distances, the film that you had intended to because, quite frankly, you probably didn't have much of a season. And those of you that are fall athletes, you might not be able to train right now, at least not with your school team. And so it's a big question mark for some of you as well. So I don't really have a ton of answers. The advice I have is to be communicative with those coaches, but also be respectful because they might not have answers to give right now either. So hopefully this video gave you multiple things to consider. My intention is not to stress you out in any way, but to help you think about things as you navigate this process. So if you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also make sure you're subscribed because more videos are coming your way to help you prepare for the college application process this fall.